Defence. May I say it's a pleasure, Secretary of State, to have you back in front of our committee. Thank you very much for making yourself available. And it's also a pleasure to welcome David Williams, the Permanent Secretary at the Ministry of Defence again, and also General Dame Sharon Naismith, the Vice Chief of the Defence Staff. A very, very warm welcome to all of you. And at the very outset, Secretary of State, may I first of all thank your good self and the Ministry of Defence staff for their cooperation with respect to the various classified and secret briefings that have been provided to us at the Ministry of Defence building, and also the cooperation for the various visits that we have had within the UK as well as abroad. And can you also convey to your ministers for making themselves available for providing regular in-brief briefings to myself as and when there are significant developments, especially international developments. So please do convey that on behalf of our House of Commons Defence Committee to your team. But having said that, I have got a bone to pick to start off with, which relates to the information that is available to the committee. Now, Secretary of State, you'll be aware that during our first interaction back in November of last year, 7 months ago, you rightly said that you want a new relationship with Parliament and with this committee, and you wanted to increase transparency and the flow of information that is provided to us. However, there have been various examples where, unfortunately, that standard has not been met. Now I can illustrate that with a few examples, if you will. Firstly, we've got the Permanent Secretary here with us. We were promised to have a current headcount of the department and the plans to reduce it, including plans to reduce the number of generals, admirals and air marshals. To date, we have not received that as a committee. Secretary of State, your good self promised to share with the committee the latest Armed Forces Continuous Attitude Survey. We've not received that. General Sir Rob McGowan, he promised to provide information on the percentage of fighting force that was represented by the 10,000 personnel deployed in 50 operations around the globe. We unfortunately have not received that either. And there are several other examples, let me also bring to light our evidence session, Permanent Secretary, in December, where you promised a note on the precise recruitment pipeline timeliness, as well as Capita's recruiting pipeline, as well as a note on the Annington Homes deal. We unfortunately have not received that. In addition, the DE&S war game with industry. The reason why I'm rattling off several examples, Secretary of State, is that I know you are committed to transparency and providing information. However, you can, I think, feel the exasperation and frustration in my voice on behalf of the committee that for over 7 months we have not received those various things. And it's also my understanding that the information is ready to send to us. Unfortunately, it is being held up on account of clearance at some point within the MOD. Do you think that that's acceptable, and what can you do to change that?
Well, it's very good to be with you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your welcome, and to your committee members. Thank you for the passion, the expertise, the challenge that you bring to defence business in the House. You had invited me to say a few opening words, Mr. Chairman. Perhaps I'll come back to that later, but let me try and deal with the series of points you've put to me at the outset. First of all, of course, I'll pass on the gratitude of the committee, the recognition that over this last year, the classified and secret briefings that you've had, the support for visits, and I hope that at least the longer-serving members of the committee will be able to draw a distinction between the level of information, the level of cooperation, that sort of degree of briefing that your committee now has access to, compared to previous defence committees that certainly Mr. Twigg served on, and how the government at the time and the department dealt with them then. I assume that you've written to me with a compilation of all those points that you've now raised. It hasn't. Sorry.
Basing on a
Sorry,
fortnightly basis.
if you've written to me with that compilation you've just put to me, then I apologise because that's not yet come to me, and I will respond to that immediately. But just to say to you on one or two of these things, the Armed Forces Continuous Attitude Survey, the latest version was published in May. That's available to you and your committee, just like it is to us. On the deployed personnel around the world, the most recent figures that I looked at, compared to November, I think you cited the 10,000 from General McGowan. It's somewhere over 8,500 in 38 countries on 50-odd operations. Of course, we can give you, within reason, and with the caveat for clearly special forces and other very highly classified operations, we can give you what data we can on that. And if you've been waiting for that for 7 months, I apologise, and I hadn't realised. And likewise, the recruitment data, if you've been waiting 7 months for that, well, the data you would have got in November has been overtaken by the progress we've made. Still a lot further to go, but I'll make sure that you've got that recruitment and retention data, because that hits to the heart of our ability to deal with the recruitment and retention crisis we inherited after 14 years when, I have sorry to say, the previous set of ministers set recruitment targets for each of the services and missed them in each and every year.
Secretary, I appreciate that response, but it would be good to get that in writing so that we can effectively do our work, because otherwise it really hampers our ability to get rid of the backlog and move forward in a meaningful way as well. But also, more generally, it has been discussed about more strategic, long-term things, namely the equipment plan. It was also agreed that last year's annual MOD report and the annual session with the Permanent Secretary, that we're still awaiting that, and likewise with the annual shipbuilding update. All of these things were discussed, and by the way, the annual shipbuilding update, that's 2.5 years ago. We are still none the wiser about that. I know my good friend Geoffrey Clifton Brown and his Public Accounts Committee have raised those issues when our member Derek Twigg was guesting at that particular committee. That issue was raised then as well. When do you think that these things will be received, and why are things taking so long? You know, and what can you do to change that?
Well, you asked for a more strategic view of what, as a new government with a newly elected mandate and a different vision, a new vision of defence to respond to the new era of threats that we face. We published a month ago today the Strategic Defence Review. That sets the vision and the framework within which we will now pursue the reforms that are already in place and we need to take further. We'll develop the policies that we need to develop, and we'll reinforce the warfighting readiness of our armed forces. So that gives you the strategic framework as a committee, and I no doubt you'll want to come to this, within which this Defence Department and this government will work.
That SDR is good as an overarching document, but it's the detail that committee members would be more interested in terms of the equipment plan stuff, the accounts. I think the SDR would never encapsulate things such as the shipbuilding update. Those things are things that we need the facts and figures so that we can see progress with regards to what has been promised by government. Hopefully you can appreciate the nuance of that.
I think your committee members will also appreciate, particularly those elected for the first time a year ago this week, that the details of plans that might have been the responsibility and the publication of previous ministers and a previous regime is really rather less relevant than the decisions that we will be taking now within and have already taken in this year and will take in the future now within the framework of the Strategic Defence Review. In terms of the annual set of report and accounts, that was essentially the report and annual accounts that mark the end of the previous government. I mean, if the committee wants to question me on them, I'm happy for you to do that. If you want to do a session where you question officials on them, of course you can do that. And then as far as the accounts and the decisions that we've taken as a government, they'll be reflected in the annual accounts and report in the way to come, in the normal possible way. So, but they will reflect in the way that the current doesn't. In fact, we've got a £5 billion boost to defence spending this year. That in 2 years' time, this is a government and this is a country that we're spending 2.5% on defence for the first time since 2010.
Well, look, now that I've got that off my chest and we've got certain things on record, and I hope that we will be able to get the information, and I thank you for your clarification that is something that you will hopefully get actioned as soon as possible so that we can have that information. Let's now move on to the NATO summit.
Oh, sorry, yes.
Before we move on,
I
mean, let me apologise to you and the committee for those bits of follow-up that have been stuck in the system rather than with the Secretary of State. It's not good enough, and you should expect better. It's not consistent with a very clear direction from the Secretary of State, from the ministerial team, about the importance of timely transparency to Parliament, to this committee. Frankly, for some of them, the answers when they came back weren't very good, so we've been around the boy, and then there just becomes a question of their relevance. But I'm happy to follow up on that list with the clerk and get you answers to those questions, some of which will have moved on, as the Secretary of State says, over the course of the last few months, not least with decisions made in the SDR, some of which will be fleshed out later in the year through some of our SDR implementation work. But I'm happy to commit that we will come back on those outstanding questions in the next couple of weeks at the latest.
I thank you for your commitment, Mr. Williams, and it's my job on behalf of the committee to make sure that our committee is accorded that due respect and prioritisation by the MOD to ensure that on behalf of Parliament and the British people that we can do our job. But let's move on, Secretary of State, to the NATO summit and defence expenditure. Can you please update the committee on last week's NATO summit? I know the Prime Minister made his statement in the House, but specifically on the financial commitments agreed by the UK.
By all means, Mr. Chairman, will you permit me a segue at this point to do what you'd invited me to do before the committee, to offer a few opening remarks, not least because you said the committee wants detail, and I can provide a list of the detail of the ways that this is a government and we as a ministerial team and department have been delivering for defence over this first year in government. And starting with the strategic defence review, because that will set the nature and the framework for the exchanges that you and I and your committee will have in the coming years of this Parliament. It represents a generational shift to our approach to defence. It represents a determination to move to warfighting readiness in order to deter the threats that we face and strengthen the Euro-Atlantic security. It is, if you like, the plan for change for defence. It's a plan to step up and lead in NATO. It's a plan that learns the lessons from Ukraine. It's a plan to boost British jobs, British business, British innovation right across the UK. And it's a plan that puts, for the first time for a long time, our defence people at the heart of our defence plans. And this is the way that we'll make our armed forces stronger. It's the way that we will make the British people safer. You may want to come on to the broader questions we face at the moment, but just for now to say we welcome strongly the ceasefire between Iran and Israel. We welcome the reports of a potential ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, and we are working to support those, and we await news of developments. But I say to the committee, on day 1,224 of Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine, we cannot lose sight of the war in Europe and the fight that the Ukrainians are having to defend their own country. Now, in terms of the year that we've had, I would say to you and the committee, Mr. Chairman, we've been delivering on the manifesto commitments that we made on defence this time last year. The SDR published 2.5% defence investment, 3 years earlier than anyone expected. A Germany-UK defence agreement signed within 100 days. An EU-UK security pact agreed. a National Armaments Director, post-established, recruitment well advanced, a military strategic headquarters already now established and operating, an Armed Forces Commissioner, legislation passed, recruitment underway, NATO test completed within the 100 days, and Ukraine support stepped up to record levels now in the UK, with at least £4.5 billion in military aid in this year alone. But in terms of detail, Mr. Chairman, we've gone further than that, delivering for defence, signing nearly 800 major contracts to support thousands of jobs since July, agreeing with NATO allies to spend 5% of GDP on national security by 2035, buying back 36,000 military family homes from private hands to public ownership, reversing probably the worst privatisation in history undertaken in the dying days of the 1996 Conservative government, investing £7 billion this Parliament to fix forces housing, including an extra 1.5 billion for forces family homes, building a new £50 million UK-wide support system to ensure we've got support for veterans, awarding our forces personnel last year the highest pay increase they've had for nearly over 20 years, and following up this year with an inflation-busting pay rise as well. So I can sit before this committee, Mr. Chairman, as the first Defence Secretary who can say no one who serves our forces in uniform will now be paid less than the national living wage. And none of this would have been possible with the most amazing people I have the privilege to work with day in, day out, military and civilian alike, from directors to desk officers, from service chiefs to chefs to coders. And I'm grateful to them all, Mr. Chairman. I'm grateful to them all. Many roles, one defence.
Good. Well, look, thank you for that overall perspective, and we will be going in detail into each of those issues, and it's the committee's intention, including the Middle East developments that you've alluded to. So, but coming back to the NATO summit, are there any other financial commitments that have been agreed by the UK that you would like to highlight to the committee? Because Professor Malcolm Chalmers from RUSI, he estimated that there is an increase in funding from 2.5% to 3.5% of GDP, and that equates to an extra £40 billion annually. So would that extra money accelerate delivery of the current SDR, or will defence's capabilities expand further, and if so, in what areas?
So on spending, and the NATO summit, for the first time the 32 NATO allies have recognised, as we argued actually in our election manifesto, we have argued in the Strategic Defence Review and recently in the National Security Strategy, we've argued that an essential part of national security isn't just what the Armed Forces and Defence does, but it's what we do on national resilience, what we do to protect civilian infrastructure, what we do for cyber protections. And if you like, it's the Article 3 commitments that all nations sign up to as part of the NATO alliance. And so for the first time, that's a 5% commitment in 10 years' time, a benchmark, if you like, as NATO describe it, for all 32 nations to see that core defence spending and that wider national security spending hit 5%. That's a benchmark that we have welcomed. It's one we argued for. It's one we've signed up to as a government.
Will the increase from 2.5% in 2027 to 3.5% by 2035, will that actually be tapered? So should we expect further increases in this Parliament beyond those set out at the spending review by the Chancellor?
So what you should expect, what the country can look forward to, what defence can plan on for the first time is 10 years of rising defence investment. A certainty and a profile which no one serving in uniform today, no one working in main building today has ever in their careers experienced. In this Parliament, we set out exactly how we will fund the commitments we've made. So the extra £5 billion boost this year, our first full year in government. The 2.5% that will be reached in 2027 by switching money directly from the overseas development aid budget into defence, a tough decision that we took because of the importance of meeting the threats that we face. And then an ambition to hit 3% in the next Parliament, alongside that benchmark that we are now have endorsed of a 5% national security spend as part of our NATO commitment.
Okay. Well, look, let's move on to my colleague Jesse Norman.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Chair, and welcome, Secretary of State. Secretary of State, you appreciate that this committee is a bipartisan committee, and defence has always been a bipartisan question. So I personally think it ill behoves you to make disparaging comparisons between yourself and your predecessors. I think Ben Wallace was at least as serious as Secretary of State as you are, and when you've served as long as he has, we can make the comparison. In that question, I actually did put the question to clerks as to whether the quality of responsiveness to information had improved or fallen over the last 2 years, and the answer is it's significantly fallen. So I want to say two things. This thing about responsiveness is not just about whether you filled in a few forms. It's whether you're responsive to Parliament, whether you're attending to the concerns that we have on behalf of the democratically elected Parliament of this country to exercise proper accountability and scrutiny over the armed forces. And if you're not willing to do that, then let us know. And if you are willing to do it, then give us the dates and the information by which we can expect to have the materials we've got. And we don't want to have to put date stamps on everything we talk about, but it's important, okay? So can we just mutually agree that?
I'm not looking to make disparaging remarks about the previous government. I'm stating facts and I'm drawing differences. But on the important question of any ministerial responsibility and accountability to Parliament, Mr. Norman, you and I are entirely on the same page. You have my commitment. You had it in November. If I'm falling short, and those that are working with me and for me are falling short, then I need to know we will rectify that, because it's fundamental to me that we're part of an elected government, accountable to Parliament, and you, in particular on the Defence Select Committee, have a job to do on behalf of the public and those who serve in our forces to hold us to account.
I'm grateful for that, and you appreciate, Secretary of State, what I think everyone on this side appreciates, which is it increases your authority to be responsive to accountable measures put in place and mechanisms by us. On the SDR communications, you wrote to us on the 11th of July to indicate that there had been a problem with the reading room and that was the nature of the communications failure, and that the committee had not received the documents it was supposed to have received until 12 noon, a delay of 2 hours. But in fact, the communications problem went much worse than that. There was, in fact, no reading room. The clerks have confirmed that to me. There should have been a reading room in Parliament where members of this committee could have reviewed the document. If we're setting a regime for the future, can you make that commitment now so there's no ambiguity? Because, of course, it's not just about this committee, it's also about the 21 interviews that ministers had with the media before Parliament itself was informed, and it's also about the personal briefings that were given by ministers or by officials to senior people in industry beginning that morning at 8 in the morning. So the question of accountability in relation to the SDR goes well beyond the letter you wrote, and the facts that you recounted in your letter were not in fact accurate. Could you revisit that?
I'm not, Mr. Norman, I'm actually not clear what letter you are referring to that I have written to the committee about this.
It was a letter that you wrote
especially
back
that if they were, because what was in that letter would be accurate, would be precise, and what we found when we were preparing to release the Strategic Defence Review was that the department had no established systematic procedure for ensuring that those that need and should have access in advance to something as strategic and important as the Strategic Defence Review, there was no system for doing that. We did our best and interrogated the system for any record of what was done, including to opposition frontbench spokesperson people, and to this committee, and actually to those important stakeholders like business or trade bodies or academics or ex-forces chiefs. So I have now put in place, and I confirmed this to the Speaker, I confirmed it in the House, I think last week, that I've put in place now a procedure and a system, and I'm content to share a copy with the committee as a follow-up to this session, for how in future, for major strategic documents like this, and I would anticipate this next for the Defence Industrial Strategy, and to apply for that, this committee, and then more importantly, more widely, those people leading on defence for the opposition parties in Parliament, can expect to have information and briefing and potentially copies of a strategy ahead of a formal statement in the House, on the basis, of course, that they remain that confidentiality is
confidential. Yeah. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. And I might ask the clerks just to revisit with your office what has gone wrong in that letter of the 11th of June. I won't read it out because we don't have time.
Well, if there is anything wrong, I absolutely want to know about it.
No, okay, we will do that. Thank you. Okay, just quick question now about spending. Is the Chagos Island settlement included in the 2.5%?
Sorry, say again?
Is the Chagos Island settlement included within the 2.5% defence budget that you've outlined for the next 3 years?
Well, as I think it's been confirmed in the House, the cost of the Diego Garcia settlement will be split between the Foreign Office and the Defence Department. The total
within the 2.5% budget that we're talking about. The
total cost is over £101 million a year. That's less than 0.2% of the defence budget. At net present value, the total cost of it is £3.4 billion. That, I have to say, Mr. Norman, for something that sits at the very heart of our unique US-UK defence intelligence and security relationship, where we do things together on and from Diego Garcia that could not be done anywhere else in the world, is a profoundly good investment for this country, for our alliance, and for that sort of wider security that we can help guarantee.
Am I right in thinking that Sizewell C is included within the 1.5% additional defence commitment? i.e. a civilian nuclear power station?
Well, that will have. I think we're less than a week, aren't we, since the NATO summit and the agreement. The committee will have had the guidance from NATO, because I promised to send that to the chairman ahead of this session. That, by the way, is NATO guidance, has not been published at the moment, but it gives an indication of the way that NATO is looking at definitions. It does include critical infrastructure. And the whole notion of this 1.5%, this question of national security, is a recognition really of the way the world is changing. It's reflected in the SDR, that our national security isn't just about our defensive security now. You have to take in our cyber security, our energy security, our border security, all arguably things that the public recognises as important parts of a country that is safe, a country that's resilient. So those sort of decisions will come in due course. I can't give you a firm answer now. I can only point to you what the NATO guidance at the moment has been set out.
That's helpful.
Thank a week ago.
In the spending review, current spending in MOD increases by 0.7% a year for the next 3 years. Given that defence inflation will be probably higher, for reasons we know, than regular inflation, this effectively means that the actual amount of new spending that can be incurred on readiness is going to be at least static. How are you going to fund things like the massive increase in drones that we need in order to be anywhere near meeting the lethality targets of the armed forces?
Well, many things become possible because of this record increase in defence investment in this Parliament that we haven't seen since the end of the Cold War.
Even if it's 0.7% on current
many things become possible, but not everything, and we will settle those in the detailed work we've now started to produce a defence investment plan. But on drones, Mr. Norman, you may have seen, this is an area which was very much highlighted as a autonomy, new innovation, new tech, combining with some of the heavy metal of our traditional platforms, was very much a theme of the Strategic Defence Review. So we have been able to act within just 4 weeks, and I announced that we would increase to £4 billion in this Parliament, the investment that we make in autonomy in drones. That's more than double that was in the budget before. It's largely capital expenditure, and we will learn the lessons from Ukraine in being able to develop not just better and produce more drones for Ukraine, which we will do this year. We will increase by at least tenfold the drones that we supply to Ukraine this year. But we will step up the pace of learning those lessons, putting that technology into the hands of our own warfighters, because that's a big contribution to being able to make our forces stronger, more capable of deterring any would-be adversaries, and also starting to lead the way within NATO for the way that this new realm of autonomy, which I have to say, working as closely as we do uniquely with Ukraine, are probably best placed within the NATO alliance to understand and to implement.
If I may, just to supplement the Defence Secretary's comments, so for certain categories of drones, as the Defence Secretary said, actually it's capital investment, and our annual growth, real terms growth in our capital budget over the spending review period is around 7% a year. So the capital budget is growing rather higher. For those drones that might be funded through current expenditure, to use your phrase, one-way attack drones, for example, that will be covered within our munitions pipeline. We've set aside money in the SDR for munitions, always on production. So whether it's artillery shells or one-way attack drones, those will come out of that heading.
If we now move on to the F-35As, Derek Twigg, please.
Secretary of State, the purchase of the F-35A represents a change in the UK's nuclear posture. But the use of that deterrent will require the US backing. Why has the government decided to pursue this approach rather than a new sovereign nuclear capability?
You're right, Mr. Twigg, it is a change in our posture. Some have described it as the most significant change in our nuclear posture for a generation. It is alongside and additional and separate from our continuing total commitment to our independent nuclear deterrent delivered through CASD. And it is a recognition that this is a way that the UK can recognise the rising nuclear risks that we face as part of the increasing general threats, that we can step up and play a stronger role within NATO, and that we can help in this way reinforce the deterrent strength of our NATO alliance.
Can I ask, is it still the plans to purchase a total of 138 F-35s? And can we expect the F-35A to make up the greater proportion of that purchase?
So we've done nothing to that sort of ultimate 138, that 138 figure. The immediate,
when do you expect that to be
the immediate next tranches
yeah.
of F-35 purchases total around 27, and we will swap in the purchase of 12 F-35As for what would otherwise have been 12 of those 27 35Bs.
And when will we have actually purchased the 138?
I would expect those F-35As to start being delivered before the end of the decade.
Isn't it the case that the work share for the UK on the F-35As is less than the F-35Bs?
Is that us?
What I propose is to suspend the session very shortly, and if I could request all members and the Secretary of State, we were notified beforehand that there was going to be a vote, if we could proceed to the votes as soon as possible, and Secretary of State, as soon as yourself and a quorum of the committee is present, then we will recommence. Order, order.